Welcome to the program today. Manu Gonzalez here in studio, but I have by Skype Tim Mahoney from Thinking Man Films. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thank you for having me back.
You know, this has been a great journey for myself of watching the development of all the films that you've been making, and here we are, Journey to Mount Sinai #2. And I want to show a trailer here in a minute, but let's talk a little bit about people have the opportunity to see this on the big screen. So kind of give us right at the beginning the background of how they can find the film.
Yes, we're going to be in theaters nationwide as a Fathom Event on May 15th and May 17th. 2 different nights, a Monday and a Wednesday. And those are the only 2 nights right now that we're on because that's the type of event that it is. So if you don't get to see it now, you're going to miss it. And I think it's very, very important for audiences to see it in the theater because it's going to be an amazing experience. I've watched this film, on monitors in the edit suite, but it's not the same. You see so much more and really experience so much more. But not only that, but we have a special addition at the end of this film that's going to be an experience for people as well, because the Israelites were called to go to the mountain to worship God. And I just felt led to make that a special little closing where we're going to be worshiping God, because we're at a time in our nation when we are faced with a lot of difficulties. And I believe this is going to be an insight that you're going to get out of this movie, Journey to Mount Sinai. They were going there to worship God. They were going there to make a covenant with God. And we're going to ask people around the nation to join us at the end of this film in a very special time of worship that I'll be leading, by the way. So awesome. May 15th and May 17th is going to be the night. You can go to patternsofevidence.com to get tickets. And you should get them now, because I've seen in my area that the tickets are selling fast and they might not add other screens. So we're in a battle against Hollywood to hang on to these movie screens. And if we can get people to buy tickets early, you'll be sure that you have a seat there and you don't want to get turned away.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, one of the things that is tremendous about the film is I've been down in Sinai, and when you're there, and just the whole region, I guess the whole Sinai, Saudi Arabia, southern Israel, Eilat, Gulf of Aqaba, when you're there, it's overwhelming, the majestic of the beauty of the area, and yet you guys have captured it so well in the film. And instead of just talking about it, why don't we show the trailer right now and let people see kind of a glimpse.
I'm investigative filmmaker Tim Mahoney, and my investigation continues for the true location of Mount Sinai. Follow me and Exodus Explorers on a search for more biblical evidence.
These are the 12 stones?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
At this place, something very important happened.
There was so much evidence. It felt like I walked into something that was 3,500 years old, undisturbed.
The characteristics of Mount Sinai described in the Bible match the characteristics of a volcano exactly.
How could Moses have ascended a mountain into an active volcanic eruption?
When Moses fled, he went to Midian. Why haven't scholars looked in Midian in Saudi Arabia?
Because they can't. That's why.
What risk would these Exodus explorers be willing to take to prove the Bible?
After 5 years, he made a desperate decision.
Yes, he made a desperate decision.
That just kind of poisoned the well for everyone else doing to do scientific work in the area. And they put fences up and keep people away.
This Jeep roared up and 3 desert policemen jumped out, and these guys are waving these AK-47s right in the faces of my children and just screaming, "Get out of here."
We can't get into the area, but we can see what we need to see through the fence.
They stumbled upon something that was pretty unique.
Is this the holy altar where God made a covenant with the nation of Israel?
They didn't use it for sacrificing animals. What else would you use it for?
Once I realized what this site was, I dropped to my knees.
Have they found the mountain of God where Moses received the 10 Commandments?
Why would you go to church every week? Why would you pray? Why would you look forward to the future if the whole foundation of what you are doing this for is fiction?
This is some of the most amazing, awe-inspiring, foundational, miraculous acts of the Lord throughout the entire Scriptures.
Join me as I conclude my 20-year search for which mountain best matches the biblical event in Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2, a nationwide theatrical Fathom event May 15th and 17th. Get tickets now.
So, welcome back, and as you can see from the trailer, the images, the graphics, the even all the other add-ons, the charts, the animations, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I think that this film, people have said, and it's been a long time. I don't know if you know this, but it's been in 2003, May 1st, I went into Saudi Arabia officially. And with permission, with Jim and Penny Caldwell, Dr. Leonard Moeller, and Dr. Glenn Fritz. And we went there, and we were there till the 15th. There's a beauty in the desert, but this trip, we were, like I said, given permission to be there. But once we got there, we were not welcomed. And there's a bit of this story that's in this investigation as to what happened. So for me, I have been trying to make this film for 20 years. And just got off from talking with Jim and Penny Caldwell that we believe that this is the time when this film is supposed to come out. There's a message about Mount Sinai, and the audience, I think, is going to be able to, many people won't be able to go there, but if you can watch this in the cinema, you're going to be able to have a sense that you've been there. I'm going to take you to places. And once again, I've watched these films on monitors, and we have large ones, but it's nothing compared to being in a theater and seeing it and experiencing it. If you want to have that sense of being there, potentially being at the very location where the Israelites were, that's what we're investigating. This investigation, I've looked at 6 mountains. Started in the fall with the first film, and now we're concluding with the next 3 mountains. And 2 of these are in Saudi Arabia. And as you can tell, there's a lot to absorb, and there's a pattern of evidence that we're going to unfold that I think is going to be very encouraging and inspiring for people in their faith.
Mm-hmm. You know, if you're willing, I've watched all of your films going back, many, many years. Talk about the patterns of evidence theme and the idea, and even maybe some of the other films that you've done in the past and how it leads up to really the culmination of these last 2 films. Right.
Well, the story of the Exodus actually begins with Abraham. And in our very first film, which was on the Exodus, we tell that. We show Abraham that God gave Abraham a promise. And as some people might know, Abraham and his wife Sarah had a hard time having a child. And by faith, Abraham had to believe that God had told him that he was going to be a blessing to all the nations, and that through his seed, this blessing would come. But once again, eventually, through God's miraculous provision, Abraham and Sarah have Isaac. And then from Isaac has Jacob and Esau, and Jacob then becomes the one who becomes he's later named Israel. And he, with his wives, they end up having 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is the story of the promise that Abraham was given, that someday his descendants would have this land that he had walked. And this is the story of the promised land. But so the first film starts with Jacob and his family going into Egypt as a small group of people, and they grow. And that was my first investigation. We looked for a pattern of evidence of the Israelites coming into Egypt. And as a small group, growing, then becoming enslaved because there were too many of them. Then we looked for the plagues of Egypt and the exodus of these people out of Egypt and the conquest of the promised land. That was our first big investigation. And then the second one had to do with writing. It had to do with the ability for Moses to write the Bible. And I had heard that in this same location in Egypt that we were finding the evidence of the early Israelites, the early alphabet, they believe, came from this location. And somebody took an Egyptian, hieroglyph that looked like a bull's horns, and turned that into a phonetic letter, which became the alphabet, the alpha. And eventually it turned around and becomes the letter A. Mm-hmm. And that fascinated me to think that, is this connected to the Israelites? And what we found out in that film is there's a strong connection, that this alphabet migrates to the promised land. And what does it tell us? It tells us that Moses had the ability to write the first books of the Bible but more importantly, that the Israelites had the ability to read the books of the Bible. And it says, write these commands on your doorposts. Now, somebody will say, well, why was that so important? Well, this is what the Bible is telling us. And we found physical evidence that this alphabet is the archaeology that connects us to it. And what does it say about the Bible? It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God's Word is so important, I believe, that he gave us the ability to know who he is by this technology of the alphabet that everyone can use. But its main purpose is to know who God is. And then we went on then with the investigation to the Red Sea Miracle 1 and 2, which we looked for the locations, and that dealt with miracles. And we looked for different sea crossings, and was it shallow, was it deep, was it supernaturally parted, or was it just naturalistically, wind blowing on a shallow surface? And then from there, now here we are at Journey to Mount Sinai. And we are searching for 6 different locations. We're looking at 6 different locations for the real location of Mount Sinai. And that's what this investigation, back way in 2003, is when I started this. Now to today, now we've come, and we've got Journey to Mount Sinai 2, as we said, in theaters May 15th and May 17th. And I believe this is, some people say it's one of the best films that we've made. It really is a powerful film, and you have to see it in the theater. And you need to bring your family. It's for older kids, not for younger kids, I would say. You should bring your Bible study group, or invite your church, invite your Sunday school class, whoever that is. This is going to be a great evening. I think people are going to be very, very inspired with this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love geography myself, and to see the even the 3-dimensional animations that you have, or just 3-dimensional graphs and maps and charts, and to see the elevations, just beautiful done. It's pretty awesome. And one of the other things that I think is really really helpful, talk, if you will, about the nature of the scorecard. We talk about the scorecard over and over. Kind of give us the background of how that came to be and how it's used. Yeah, well, we're looking at 6 different mountains, and as a filmmaker and a storyteller, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this? Do I tackle it one mountain at a time, or do I tackle it one attribute at a time, or one piece of the biblical text at a time? Do I follow the Bible narrative and then jump all around? And we decided what we needed to do is look at one mountain at a time. And so we created this Mount Sinai Scorecard. And if people go to our website, patternsofevidence.com, they'll see download Scorecard, and they can look at a trailer there again for themselves, and they can also purchase tickets. But what we have here is the biblical text. All the Patterns of Evidence films are based on biblical information. A pattern of evidence is a scientific approach. So we are looking scientifically for the pattern that the Bible communicates. So what we have here is a journey to the mountain. There's campsites and wildernesses. Can we find the campsites and the wildernesses to these different routes? So each mountain has an advocate for that mountain. And I allow those advocates to speak about, the location and the travel speed that it would take. Then we look at the land of Midian. Well, Bible says that Moses fled to the land of Midian. Well, where is it? Is there any archaeological evidence for it? And if so, can we find evidence then near that that there's a wilderness that a mountain would be next to? And so it says that Moses went to the backside of the wilderness. So once again, these are different portions that we're looking at. And then we've got attributes. The mountain should have a plain in front of it. There should be enough water to have the Israelites there. And then there should be a stream coming down from the mountain and a cave. And these are features that are mentioned in the biblical text. And then it says that there are artifacts, potentially an altar with 12 pillars, a large encampment area. So some mountains are very tight. It's like there's no way you could get that many Israelites in there. Now, some people in the earlier films have said, well, they don't think there were that many Israelites. They only think there might have been, the smallest I've heard is maybe a few hundred, and to maybe 5,000 to 15,000. But the Bible says there were 600,000 men that were fighting.
And if you add those along with women and children, you're going to end up with 2 to 3 million. So was there enough space around the mountain for that campsite? And then finally, there's this issue of golden calf worship. There are some people who are pointing towards inscriptions of bulls that are saying this is connected to the golden calf worship. And then at one mountain, we're going to be looking at a cemetery, a large cemetery in the middle of nowhere. And you say, well, what's the significance of that? Well, when Moses came down from the mountain, it says that there were people that were worshiping the golden calf. And Moses told the Levites to put on a sword and kill those people. And they said that 3,000 people were killed that day. Well, guess what? There is this mammoth cemetery, what appears to be, I'm not sure, they've not been counted, but it's acres and acres of stones, standing stones, and it's a cemetery. So the massive amount of people were buried there. That, to me, is one of the most fascinating portions of this investigation, is the cemetery. But now what's interesting is there are some other mountains, like Har Karkum, that we look at, that's one of these mountains that we have on the scorecard, that has pillars. It has 12 pillars. And there are inscriptions there that some are pointing to that have a biblical connection. So the question is which one of these is Mount Sinai? Then we also look at a volcano. Sir Cullen Humphreys is from Cambridge. He's a material scientist, and he is suggesting that Mount Sinai actually has the attributes of a volcano, that the burning bush was because of the shoot of flames coming up. And he sees God working through nature. So this is the big investigation that we're going to be looking at. And once again, I think I'm thankful to have been able to complete something that started so long ago for myself in 2003 now. And it's so funny, May 15th was the last day in Saudi Arabia, and May 15th is the day the movie's coming out in theaters. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but it's a providential coincidence, I would say, for me.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, God has been providentially moving and working behind the scenes in all of your work, which again is drawing people to Him and the gospel for sure. Talk about the first film, the 3 sites there, and then now you're in this follow-up, the final film, I imagine, at least for the moment, the last 3 sites. What are those sites?
Okay, we're going to be looking at Har Karkum, Mount Bedr, and Jebel Alaz. A number of people in your audience, I'm sure, know about Jebel Alaz. You've probably had lots of discussion about it. The thing that I found is that when I work on a film like this with our team, we add information that you might not have ever heard before. We're going to look at the wildernesses. We're going to look at key points that I think will be informative to why we think, and at the very end of this, I'm going to share with you what I think, which is the mountain that I think scores the highest, as it were. This is our bowling for Mount Sinai scorecard here. But we're going to see which ones get the strikes and the spares and which ones are gutter balls as it goes. And as we look at that, I think it's been helpful to basically look at some other things, and things oftentimes in an investigation that I don't think are as important. Steve Law, my writing partner and researcher, has looked at certain things, and as he's dug it out, and he's talked about a wilderness, for example, the wilderness of Shur. Where is that wilderness, and what are the biblical texts that really inform us to where that is? Because sometimes biblical ideas can be pulled to the east or to the west, depending upon someone's theory. And I think people are going to learn an awful lot, and it's entertaining too. I want to say that I'm trying to make the films as fast moving and entertaining, not so fast that you can't understand it, but so that it just seems to flow. And that's the craft that I think we've been working on here, to try to weave something that's beautiful, that is informative, that's inspiring, and that's truthful. And that's what we're looking for is, well, what is the truth here? It's like I said, I don't really care where it is. I just want to know what the truth is. And what we're seeing is an amazing pattern of evidence. And that's at the end of the film, I'm going to share with you what I think, which I've never done before. So it's a first for me.
Yeah, one of the benefits of the way that you interact in the sense with different perspectives. Talk a little bit about that. About, it's not just here's this one side, this one perspective, but talk about the different ways you interview the different scholars and the different sides of the equation.
In this particular film, I decided not to interview anyone who just said, no, it doesn't happen. So, because that's such a short conversation, right? There's nothing to talk about. So what I wanted to do was to hear from different scholars, and that's what a patterns of evidence film does, is you want to hear from different points of view, multiple points of view, so you can look at a subject matter from different angles. And I try to then give as much clarity to that point of view as I can. But then I want to hold a standard. I want to have the standard say, well, what does the biblical text say? Can I checklist this off? Does it seem reasonable? Because some things are interpretations. And at the end of the day, that has been the approach. So we're going to hear from Deb Hearn, who's from Australia, and she got her PhD. This is her whole thesis, is wildernesses. Where is the water in the wildernesses and the different watersheds? And as she's looking for the camping and the route and everything. And that's the genius of her theory, is she's going to try to pull and explain to us and communicate where she thinks the Israelites were in these wildernesses. How do you define those wildernesses? I think with Sir Colin Humphreys, he's using science. He's trying to say, for theoretically speaking, how did the bitter water turn sweet? And what was the mechanism for that? What was the distance that they could have traveled? And when they got there, what explains the thunder, the lightning, the earthquakes, the fire? He says it's got to be a volcanic connection there. And so in each of these cases, you're going to be able to listen to these different scholars. And then I add other people, such as Yuri Zarins, who was the surveyor for Saudi Arabia in that area. And he's going to give his input. We're going to hear from Jim Phillips, who's going to talk to us about why it is that, you're not going to get very far in some countries trying to do an investigation because of the political nature of the biblical story. Because the biblical story is about Israel. It's about the formation of this nation. That's why it's hard in Egypt or in Jordan or in Saudi Arabia to basically, where there's a lot of biblical evidence and biblical activity, to get any kind of work done that would support that. So it's a hot potato in some cases. And I think it's just important for us to know, when someone's being very critical about the Bible, a lot of that criticism comes from two things. One of them is, are they looking in the right place? Are they looking, if they're trying to put the Exodus in the Sinai Peninsula, is where many people have, they don't find a lot of evidence for that. But if the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the sea, if the Red Sea, which was called Yam Suf, the Bible, if the sea that was parted, what sea is that? And if anybody knows their maps, there's the Sinai Peninsula is right in the middle here, and there's the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. And if the Israelites didn't cross one of these little shallow lakes up by Egypt, but actually crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, then that tells us and informs us that they're not in Kansas anymore, right? They're not in the Sinai. They're in what would become in the future Saudi Arabia or Arabia. So those are the interesting clues that we're looking at in building a case. And so why is this important? Somebody will say, well, hey, I believe it's, I believe all this. But there's so many young people today that don't think there's any connection to the Bible, and are, and they're looking for information. They're getting a lot of bad information, as it were. And what I've experienced going on college campuses and talking with people is that their professors are telling them that the Bible is a myth. They're saying, hey, we already know there's no evidence on the Sinai Peninsula. This story didn't happen. And that goes back to, wait a minute, you've made a decision based on what? And that's how some of my films have been. I've basically asked, well, what's your premise for making this decision that the Bible isn't historical? And once you start to unpeel that a little bit, you go, but wait a minute, let's look at the pattern of evidence. And then we start looking at things completely different. And then I had one young woman tell me that her professor, she was told that there was no evidence for the Bible, for the Exodus. And she felt that maybe she shouldn't be a believer or Christian anymore. She had come from a foreign country and came here. And you know what? She was actually at a Christian college. And the professor said, we don't have any evidence for any of this, and it's not really sure that it happened, but it's okay. It's a wonderful story.
Yeah. Wow.
But the problem with that is that Jesus points to Moses, and Jesus and the prophets point back to the Exodus. People point back to these things. And what I can tell you is that mainstream scholars realize that if this didn't happen, then the rest of this doesn't mean anything because they're misinformed and they can't be divine. Christ can't be the Son of God because he didn't even know that Moses didn't exist. Mm-hmm. That's the domino effect. So this girl heard that this wasn't happening. She went back to her dorm and she was very, very discouraged. And you know what? She thought, why did I become a believer? Why did I become a Christian? And this other student noticed and said, well, what's wrong? And she explained what happened in her class. And the student said, you need to see patterns of evidence. Mm-hmm. And she said, what's that?
Wow.
And at the time, so she was able to watch a copy online. And she spent the night and she just wrote down all these notes and everything. Mm-hmm. The next day she goes to her professor and says, you are wrong. Mm-hmm. And he says, what? He goes, there is evidence for the Exodus. There's patterns of evidence. You need to see patterns of evidence. And he says, what's that? Anyway, but you know something? The professor did watch it. He changed his whole understanding. He changed his test. And that girl's faith was saved, And I've had many times where people have told us that this has been such a different encouragement to them. It's made them bold. Yeah, and I'm going to say to your audience, if you want to be encouraged, if you want to be inspired, if you want to have a sense of this is God at work, if you want to see potentially exactly where on the cinema, because you're probably not going to see it in other ways, go to see this movie on May 15th, May 17th. Bring as many people as you can. There's going to be something special. I believe God has something special for us at this event. And like I said, we're going to be ending this film with worship. Mm-hmm. And something I'm trusting by faith that something special is going to happen across the nation. We need to learn how to worship God. Just as the Israelites were going in to face the challenges that they had in they were supposed to go in there and conquer the promised land. Well, we've got challenges, right? We got giants and things that we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to need to know how to worship God in that battle.
Amen. Well, Tim, I appreciate your time. And for those watching, patternsofelvidence.com, check it out May 15th through 17th. You'll absolutely want to see this film. And I would even tell you to go and get the other film as well in advance so that you can be up to speed. But not that you need to, but the whole ministry has so many films. And I've seen all of them. And they're tremendous ways to encourage your faith and also to share with others. So, Tim, we'll see you at the theater.
That sounds great. Thank you again for having me.
All right, guys. Thank you for watching, and see you at the theater. See you next time.